In the biting chill of a furious snowstorm, an 8-year-old girl finds herself at the mercy of a brutal lumberjack, the terrifying ordeal unfolding just steps from the snow-draped silence of the town church, a supposed place of sanctuary. In a community long accustomed to turning a blind eye to the darkness in its midst, her desperate plight seems destined to be lost to the wind. But one woman, the town's solitary pastor, Reverend Grace Holloway, becomes an unwilling witness to the unfolding horror. What she does next will defy every expectation, challenging not only a dangerous man, but the sleeping conscience of an entire town. Now, let the story begin. The wind ripped through Havenwood like a judgment. It was a late November storm people would remember for years, burying the landscape under a suffocating blanket. Snow attacked horizontally, erasing familiar streets, turning the town ghostly and alien. Streetlights, fuzzy halos, cast weak orange pools onto knee-deep drifts. Most of Havenwood hunkered down, doors locked, fires stoked, the world outside muffled by the blizzard's roar. It was a night for safety, but outside, a small figure struggled. Lily Rose was 8, tiny for her age, swallowed by the night. Her thin, worn coat offered little defense against the ice-toothed wind. It whipped her stringy brown hair across her face, stinging her eyes, red-rimmed from tears and the biting cold. Each gust threatened to tear her from her unstable footing towards St. Michael's Parish. Its dark windows, usually beacons, were cold, blind eyes tonight. She clutched a threadbare mitten to her cheek, not for warmth, but to stifle the whimper escaping her lips. Whimpers were dangerous. Noise was dangerous. He hated noise. Travis. The name was a raw wound in her mind, pure fear. A fresh wall of snow slammed into her. She gasped, the frigid air searing her lungs. Her small, soaked boots skidded on hidden ice. She flailed, crashing heavily onto her side. A sharp pain shot up her leg, and a cry, small, animalistic, was torn from her before she could smother it. Panic, cold as the ice beneath her, surged. He'll hear. He'll find me. Scrambling up, ignoring the throbbing in her ankle, terror fueled her. Her wide, desperate eyes fixed on the dark rectory beside St. Michael's. Light, warm and yellow, spilled from a downstairs window, a solitary beacon in the chaos. It was a promise, but her only one. Inside that lit window, Reverend Grace Holloway, 58, set down her book. The wind howled, but a subtle shift in its lament snagged her attention. Perhaps a silence within the roar, a dissonance her soul registered. Significant things, she knew, arrived unannounced. A fleeting memory flickered. Another storm. A cry not heeded. She pushed it away. This was her refuge. Yet, the unease remained. She walked to the window, touching the cross she wore. Outside was a vortex of white. Only the storm. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. It was her instinct about hidden burdens. She'd come to Havenwood seeking peace after the aftermath. The town was good at keeping secrets, but secrets festered. The town was good at keeping secrets, but secrets festered. Lily reached the snow-choked path to the rectory. Each step was agony. The ache in her ankle intensified. She felt warm wetness inside her boot. Her breaths came in ragged gasps. The light seemed impossibly far. A sharp memory pierced her fog. Travis's face, contorted with rage, his roar, the sting of his hand, the crash of her mother's music box. Useless! Get out! The memory of her mother, Maggie, faded. Travis said she'd run off, hadn't wanted Lily. But sometimes, Lily thought she heard her voice, a faint hum, or just the wind. Lily reached the porch. She huddled against the stone wall, shivering violently, too scared to knock. What if he answered? What if this stranger wouldn't see, wouldn't listen? Ms. Bell, her teacher, had a kind face, But she couldn't stop Travis. No one could. Dizziness washed over her. The porch light pulsed. The storm's roar receded, replaced by ringing. She slid down the wall, curling into a tiny, frozen offering. The last thing she saw was the warm light, a distant, unattainable star. Then, only the cold and the dark. The insistent, unnerving feeling finally drove Reverend Grace Holloway to the heavy oak door of the rectory. The wind howled, but beneath it she felt an almost imperceptible pull, a silent summons. Opening the door, a blast of snow and frigid air assailed her, momentarily blinding her. Then she saw it, a small, dark shape huddled on the porch, already half dusted with fresh snow. For a horrifying second, her mind suggested rags, but the small, still human form was undeniable. "Oh dear God," Grace breathed. Rushing forward, she knelt, brushing snow from a small face blue-white with cold, framed by damp hair. It was a child, a girl, Lily Rose. Grace recognized her, a quiet, almost invisible child from sparse Sunday school attendance. Lily was unconscious, her breathing terrifyingly shallow. Panic lanced through Grace, but decades of pastoral care took over. With unexpected strength, she scooped the child, shockingly light, an ice-cold bird. Inside, Grace gently laid Lily on the worn sofa, stripping off her sodden coat and boots. Her heart clenched at the thin, mismatched socks and cheap dress beneath. The girl's skin was like marble, dangerously cold, mottled with old and new bruises, a dark one blooming angrily on her cheekbone. "Stay with me, child," Grace murmured, a prayer, racing to gather blankets and warm water. She worked frantically, chafing frozen limbs, coaxing warmth. Lily's lips were blue, eyelids faintly bruised. Dabbing her face, Lily let out a tiny, unconscious moan, a sound so full of suffering it pierced Grace. Seeing Lily's suffering tore open a carefully constructed wall. 30 years ago, Grace failed Daniel, a boy in another parish, missed the signs of abuse hidden beneath silence. That failure, that inability to protect, had haunted her, driving her to the quiet anonymity of Havenwood. The system, and she as part of it, had catastrophically failed him. Now, looking at Lily so small, so broken, the old wound tore open, but bled not despair, but fierce, unexpected resolve. This time, she would not fail. She remembered Nora Bell, Lily's teacher, her worried visit just last week. Nora had described Lily's recurring bruises hidden under long sleeves, her quiet, almost erased presence. When asked, Lily mumbled about falling, but explanations never fit. Nora had raised it with Principal Thompson, but he was dismissive, accepting the stepfather, Travis Gormley's, claim Lily was clumsy, mentioning Travis had friends in town. Child Services, contacted anonymously, just filed a report. Nothing happened. The suffocating injustice, the system subverted by influence or indifference, enraged Grace then and fueled her fire now. This wasn't clumsiness. This was terror's mark. She thought of Travis Gormley, known for drinking and temper, living out by Miller's Creek. And Lily's mother, Maggie. Whispers she'd run off or disappeared. No one seemed to know, or perhaps no one cared enough. The neglect, the psychological torment Lily must have endured was as horrifying as the physical marks. To be 8 years old and feel so utterly alone, so unprotected that fleeing into a deadly blizzard seemed the only option. Grace's heart ached. The bruises weren't just a system's failure, but their community's, hers included. But no more. Sitting vigil beside the slowly warming child, a new, unshakable purpose solidified. She would not stand idly by. She would not be silent. The storm might rage outside, but within the small rectory, another storm was gathering. The first grey light of dawn filtered through rectory windows, painting the snow-choked world. The The storm had lessened its fury, though wind still moaned. Inside, Reverend Grace Holloway kept vigil. Lily Rose slept deeply, breathing easier, a faint flush returning to her cheeks. But the exhaustion in her face, the bruises, and the lingering chill in her hands spoke of an ordeal beyond a mere childish escapade. As Grace watched, her thoughts revisited Havenwood's hushed conversations and averted gazes regarding Travis Gormley and Lily's mother, Maggie. Maggie Rose had been vibrant, arriving years back with Travis and baby Lily. They seemed ordinary. Then laughter faded. Whispers circulated of shouting. Maggie seen with sunglasses, Travis's belligerence at the bar. About 2 years ago, Maggie vanished. Travis claimed she'd run off with a trucker. Some accepted it, others suspected a terrible fight, burned possessions. Havenwood stayed silent. Travis was best left undisturbed, and Mayor Whitman's influence ensured no real police inquiry. Maggie became a whispered ghost story, a cautionary tale. What no one knew was the horrifying truth. Maggie hadn't run off. She was a prisoner in the back room, kept there after a desperate escape attempt, with Lily resulted in a severe beating. Travis's threat was clear. Harm Maggie and Lily if she ever spoke or tried to leave again. The threat against Lily was her unbreakable leash. Maggie lived a terrifying silence, hearing Lily's distant life, tormented by powerlessness, kept alive only by desperate hope for Lily's escape. Grace knew none of this specific horror, but the protective rage she felt for Lily was primal. The child needed more than warmth. She needed medical attention. Grace wouldn't call Sheriff Brody, a man known more for loyalty to Whitman than zeal. No, Lily needed a doctor first, an objective assessment. Old Doc Abernathy had retired. The newcomer was Dr. Michael Breyer. Dr. Michael Breyer, 35, had come seeking quiet. His background as a state ward helped by nuns gave him a deep desire to help children. New to Havenwood, he was a keen observer, sensing its clannishness, a hidden web beneath the surface. Grace found Breyer's emergency home number. This was an emergency. She dialed, hand steady despite a tremor. Glancing at Lily, still asleep, a fragile piece on her bruised face, Grace whispered, "Hold on, little one. Help is coming. This time things will be different." The memory of Daniel, of her past failure, was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was a spur, a solemn vow whispered into the dawn. The fight for Lily Rose had just begun. Dr. Michael Breyer answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep, but instantly alert. Dr. Breyer speaking. "Doctor, forgive me for calling so early," Reverend Grace Holloway began, urgency in her tone. "My name is Reverend Grace Holloway. I have a child here, Lily Rose, out in the storm, hypothermic and other concerns needing immediate medical attention." A pause. Michael sat up. "A child out in that blizzard? Reverend, give me your address. I'll be there quickly. Roads are a mess." Rectory, Main Street. Under 30 minutes later, Dr. Breyer's sturdy four-wheel drive pulled up. He emerged, serious, medical bag in hand. Grace met him, relief palpable. "Doctor." "Breyer, thank you." "Of course, Reverend. Where is she?" Grace led him to the study. Lily lay still on the sofa. Michael approached gently, professional. "Hello, Lily," he murmured softly. He began his exam, quiet, thorough, checked vitals, listened, found bruises, old and new, mottling her arms, back, legs, face. Signs of dehydration, malnutrition, a swollen tender left ankle. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition," he murmured. "Ankle badly sprained, possibly fractured? These bruises, many are older, not just from one night." His voice held an edge of cold fury. Grace confirmed, "Her stepfather is Travis Gormley." Michael's eyes hardened. He knew abuse patterns. His own past neglect resonated. Can't send her back to that man. Grace explained Travis's reputation, the town's reluctance to interfere, dismissed concerns like Nora Bell's. Dr. Breyer cleaned scrapes, expertly bandaged the ankle. He administered hydration as Lily stirred slightly, speaking gently to her while cataloguing the evidence of ongoing cruelty. Each bruise was a silent scream. "Reverend," Michael stated grimly, "this child is a victim of severe abuse and neglect. Fleeing into the storm was likely desperation. As a physician, I'm a mandated reporter. I have to report this, but local channels seem compromised. We need to be strategic." "I have no intention of doing so," Grace stated firmly. "But what are our options? I've seen how this town operates. Travis Gormley is protected." Michael met her gaze. He was new, an outsider. This risked his practice. But looking at Lily, his past and morals demanded action. "She needs hospital admission," he continued, "for documentation and safety. Petersville County Hospital is an hour away. I can arrange an ambulance or drive her myself once stable, given the need for discretion." Grace agreed. Driving was best to avoid tipping off Travis or his allies too soon. "Then that's what we'll do," Michael said. A silent pact formed in the quiet study. Science and faith united by a fierce, protective instinct. "You did a remarkable thing, Reverend," Michael said softly. "You saved her life." Grace looked at Lily. "She saved mine too, Doctor. In more ways than you know." The alliance was forged. Michael for medical and documentation, Grace for sanctuary and confronting the town's darkness. While Dr. Breyer made discreet arrangements for their trip to Petersville County Hospital, explaining to Lily in gentle, simple terms that they were going to a place with special doctors to help her ankle and make her feel all better, Reverend Grace Holloway felt a pressing need to understand more about the man who had inflicted such terror. Travis Gormley wasn't just an abstract villain. He was a resident of Havenwood, a cancer in their midst. Knowledge, she believed, was a necessary weapon in the fight ahead. Her first stop was the church office, a small book-lined room where Assistant Pastor Ruth Whitlow spent most of her days. Reverend Ruth, a woman of 60 with a calm, almost ethereal presence and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without judgment, had served St. Michael's for over 3 decades. She was the parish's living memory, a quiet repository of its joys, sorrows, and its often unspoken truths. "Ruth," Grace began, closing the door softly behind her, "I need your help. It's about Lily Rose and her stepfather, Travis Gormley." Reverend Whitlow looked up from the ledgers she was meticulously updating, her gaze sharpening with a flicker of something Grace recognized as concern. "Little Lily, is she all right? I saw her light wasn't on for the children's story hour last week." Ruth's quiet observations often caught what others missed. Grace quickly summarized the harrowing events of the night and Dr. Breyer's assessment. Ruth listened without interruption, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her usual serene expression clouding over. "That poor child," she murmured when Grace finished. "And Travis Gormley. There has always been a darkness around that man." "I need to know more about him, Ruth," Grace said. "Anything the church records might hold. When he came to Havenwood, anything about Maggie, Lily's mother." Wordlessly, Ruth rose and led Grace to a tall, oak filing cabinet in the corner, and then to a seldom-visited archive room in the church basement, filled with dusty boxes of old parish registers, newsletters, and council meeting minutes. When Maggie first arrived with him, she tried to be involved, Ruth recalled, her voice soft as she pulled out a box labeled Community Outreach, early 2000s. She volunteered for a bake sale, helped with the Christmas pageant preparations. She had such a light about her then, before he seemed to snuff it out. Together, they sifted through brittle papers. They found Maggie's name a few times in old volunteer lists, a fleeting signature on a visitor's log. Then, a brief entry in a pastoral care journal, kept by Grace's predecessor, Reverend Albright. It was dated nearly 5 years prior. Met with Maggie G. concerned about her well-being. Husband seems controlling. Offered support. She declined to elaborate. Prayed with her. A dead end, but a chilling confirmation. He isolated her, Ruth said, her voice tinged with an old sadness. It happened gradually. She stopped coming to services, then stopped being seen in town much at all. And then, she was just gone. Ruth found a tattered copy of a local newspaper from 2 years back. A small, almost dismissive article about a local woman reported missing by her husband, presumed to have left town. No follow-up, no outcry, just another forgotten story. The search yielded little concrete evidence against Travis, but it painted a grim picture of Maggie's slow erasure and the community's passive acceptance. It strengthened Grace's resolve, but also underscored the challenge. Gormley was adept at operating in the shadows, shielded by fear and indifference. Later that afternoon, after Dr. Breyer had carefully transported a bundled and sedated Lily to his car for the drive to Petersville, Grace found herself knocking on the door of Reverend Isaac Turner's cozy retirement cottage on the outskirts of Havenwood. Reverend Turner, at 66, was sharp-witted, plain-spoken, and possessed a network of contacts that spanned the state, a holdover from his more politically active younger years in a larger city parish. "Grace, come in out of the cold," Isaac boomed, his handshake firm, his eyes crinkling with warmth, though they quickly registered the gravity in her expression. Over steaming mugs of tea, Grace laid out the situation, omitting no detail of Lily's condition or Dr. Breyer's findings. Isaac listened intently, his jovial demeanor fading, replaced by a thoughtful frown. "Travis Gormley," he said, shaking his head. "Always been bad news, that one. Came here with a chip on his shoulder and a mean streak wide as the Connecticut River." He took a long sip of tea. "And you're right to be wary of Holt Whitman. Holt's more concerned with keeping the town's good name, which usually means his own, untarnished than he is with actual justice. He and Gormley, they have an understanding. Holt gets cheap lumber for his civic improvement projects, and Travis gets left alone. It's the oldest story in small-town politics, Grace, mutual back-scratching. So, going through official channels here," Grace began, "is likely to get your concerns buried so deep they'll never see daylight," Isaac finished bluntly, "especially if Gormley gets wind of it. He's not just a brute, Grace, he's a cunning one when he needs to be. And Holt will protect his assets." He leaned forward. "You said the doctor is taking her to Petersville County. Good. That's outside Holt's immediate reach. You need to make sure the report Dr. Breyer files there, with the County Child Protective Services, is ironclad. And you need to be prepared for a fight. When news of this gets out, and it will, Holt and his cronies will try to discredit you, the doctor, anyone who threatens their comfortable arrangement." "What do you suggest, Isaac?" Grace asked, valuing his pragmatic, unvarnished counsel. "For now, focus on the child. Get her safe. Get the evidence documented by objective parties. Then," he paused, his eyes glinting with a strategic light, "we might need to make some noise outside of Havenwood. I still have a few friends in the press, a contact or two in the state investigator's office. Men who owe me a favor and don't much care for small-town tyrants." His words were a lifeline. "You'd be willing to help?" Isaac snorted. "Grace, I may be retired, but I haven't taken a vow of irrelevance. Seeing a child hurt like that, and the town turning a blind eye, it boils my blood. Always has." He looked at her, a flicker of his old fire in his eyes. "But be warned. Travis Gormley, when cornered, is dangerous, and Holt Whitman will play dirty to protect himself. This won't be easy." As Grace left Isaac's cottage, the early winter dusk was settling. The information from Ruth and the stark warnings from Isaac weighed heavily on her. Yet her spirit felt strangely lighter. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but it was no longer obscured. She knew who her enemies were, and now she knew she wasn't entirely alone in the fight. The image of Lily, small and vulnerable, flashed in her mind. That night, as Travis's rage had likely been escalating in that isolated house, as Lily's terror reached its peak, Grace realized the true extent of the danger the child had been in. It wasn't just neglect, it was a ticking clock. The days following Lily's arrival at Petersville County Hospital were a blur of hushed phone calls, careful planning, and a gnawing anxiety for Reverend Grace Holloway. Dr. Michael Breyer kept her updated daily. Lily was responding to treatment for hypothermia and malnutrition, though she remained withdrawn and deeply fearful. The orthopedic specialist confirmed a hairline fracture in her ankle, now set in a small cast. Most importantly, Michael had navigated the bureaucracy of the county's Child Protective Services, filing a comprehensive report detailing Lily's injuries and his strong suspicions of sustained abuse. The case was assigned to a social worker named Ms. Albright, a coincidence of name that Grace took as a small, hopeful sign, who sounded competent and concerned over the phone. Back in Havenwood, Grace met with Nora Bell in the quiet of the church library. The young teacher's face was etched with worry, but also a fierce determination now that she knew Lily was relatively safe. "I've been going over my notes, Reverend," Nora said, pushing a slim notebook across the table. Things Lily said, or did. Little things that didn't make sense then. But now... She recounted how Lily would flinch if anyone moved too quickly near her, how she'd once drawn a family picture with a small, cowering figure hidden in a corner, how she'd obsessively hoarded bread rolls from the school lunch, stuffing them into her pockets. She told me once her mummy was sleeping for a very long time where the stars were. But then Travis overheard and got so angry, Lily never mentioned her mother again. Each detail was a fresh stab of pain for Grace, a testament to the child's prolonged suffering. "Document everything, Nora," Grace advised. "Dates, specific observations. It might be crucial." Their discreet activities, however, did not go entirely unnoticed in a town as small and interconnected as Havenwood. Grace felt it first, a subtle shift in how certain people responded to her. Mr. Henderson, the town clerk, normally jovial, became curt and unhelpful when she inquired about property records for Travis Gormley's address, citing obscure regulations. Then, a visit from Betty Ann Crenshaw, the chair of the St. Michael's Altar Guild, and a notorious town gossip with close ties to Mayor Whitman's wife. "Reverend Holloway, dear," Betty Ann began, her voice oozing false concern over tea and cookies after a guild meeting. "I couldn't help but hear that little Lily Rose Gormley is unwell. Such a shame. And that new doctor, Breyer, whisking her off to Petersville of all places. Some folks are saying it's a bit dramatic. One does hope you're not getting yourself involved in something that might prove uncomfortable for the parish." The veiled warning was unmistakable. Grace maintained a polite, non-committal smile. "Lily is receiving the care she needs, Betty Ann. That is my only concern." But the encounter left a chill. Mayor Whitman's network was clearly alert. Meanwhile, in her sterile hospital room in Petersville, Lily drifted between sleep, fear, and fleeting moments of cautious curiosity. Dr. Breyer was a constant, gentle presence. He didn't push her to talk, but spoke to her softly, explaining every procedure, sometimes just sitting quietly while she ate or drew shaky pictures with the crayons a nurse had given her. Her drawings were mostly of dark, swirling shapes, or tiny figures dwarfed by menacing, shadowy trees. Sometimes she would wake from a nightmare, whimpering for her mommy, a raw, desolate sound that tore at Michael's heart. He would reassure her, his voice a calm anchor in her sea of fear. He told her stories about the friendly animals he imagined lived in the woods, far different from the scary woods near her old house. He was slowly, painstakingly, trying to build a bridge of trust across the chasm of her trauma. One afternoon, as Michael was checking her chart, Lily whispered, so low he almost didn't hear, Is Travis coming?" Michael knelt beside her bed. "No, Lily. He is not coming here. You are safe with us. I promise." Her small hand crept out from under the blanket and tentatively touched his. It was a tiny gesture, but for Michael, it felt monumental. Back in Havenwood, another unexpected development occurred. Mr. Marvin Lyle, the octogenarian bell ringer and church caretaker, a man of few words and even fewer social calls, approached Grace after a quiet Wednesday evening service. He was a stooped, frail figure, but his eyes, pale blue and watery, held a surprising sharpness. "Reverend," he began, his voice raspy with age, "pardon an old man's meddling, but I've seen you, troubled these past few days, and I hear tell little Lily Gormley's been taken poorly." Grace regarded him with kind attention. "Yes, Marvin. She has." Mr. Lyle twisted his worn cap in his hands. "Travis Gormley," he said, the name a distasteful lump in his throat. "He ain't right. Never has been." He paused, then seemed to come to a decision. Years ago, must be nigh on 2 years now, right after his wife, Maggie, supposedly left him. I was up in the belfry late one evening, checking the ropes. It was dark, moonless. I saw a truck pull up to the old town dump, the one by the river they closed down. It was Gormley's truck. Saw him hauling something heavy from the bed, something wrapped in an old tarpaulin. Heaved it over the embankment towards the river. Never thought much on it beyond him illegally dumping trash, until now. Until I heard about Lily. Grace stared at him, her blood running cold. Something heavy, wrapped in a tarpaulin, near the time Maggie disappeared. "Marvin," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "did you ever tell anyone?" "The sheriff?" He shook his head, a look of profound regret on his face. "Figured it weren't my business. Travis is a mean one, and Sheriff Brody, well, he and Travis, they fished together." He met Grace's eyes. "But seeing that child in church sometimes, looking like a scared rabbit. And now this. An old man's conscience can be a heavy thing, Reverend." The implication of Marvin's story was monstrous, almost too horrifying to contemplate. But it fit with the fear, the whispers, the suddenness of Maggie's vanishing. It was another piece, a deeply disturbing one, in the dark puzzle of Travis Gormley. Grace thanked Marvin, her mind reeling. The embers of truth were indeed smouldering, and some, it seemed, were beginning to glow with a terrifying light. The need to protect Lily and to uncover what had truly happened to her mother became an all-consuming fire in Grace's soul. Just as a fragile sense of hope had begun to permeate the efforts of Reverend Grace and her small band of allies, Havenwood was slammed by a second, more vicious snowstorm. It arrived with breathtaking speed, a furious white squall that meteorologists on the crackling radio stations dubbed Winter's Last Stand. Within hours, the town was again plunged into a state of frozen isolation. Plows were pulled from the roads, power lines sagged and snapped under the weight of ice and snow, and a deep, primal silence descended, broken only by the wind's relentless assault and the occasional crack of a falling tree limb. For Travis Gormley, stewing in his cold, cluttered house on the edge of the woods, the storm was both a curse and a perverse kind of liberation. Lily had been gone for several days now. Initially, a sliver of him had felt a twisted sort of relief. One less mouth to feed, one less reminder of Maggie's defiance. But that relief had quickly curdled into a gnawing unease. Kids didn't just vanish. He'd made a few cursory, belligerent inquiries around town, projecting the image of a concerned, if rough-around-the-edges stepfather. He'd even reported her missing to Sheriff Brody, who'd listened with bored indifference and promised to keep an eye out. But the whispers had started. Travis had heard them in the sullen silence that fell when he walked into the Rusty Mug, in the way certain townsfolk now avoided his gaze. And then, old Jedediah Slocum, a crony of Mayor Whitman's, had cornered him by the feed store, his voice oozing sly insinuation. Heard tell that new preacher woman, Holloway, took a special interest in your girl, Travis, and that fancy new doc. Folks say they spirited her off to Petersville. For her health, they say. The words had ignited a fuse in Travis's alcohol-soaked brain. The preacher, the doctor, meddling, always meddling. His rage, never far from the surface, began to boil. He saw Lily not as a child he had harmed, but as his property, his possession, and they had stolen her. Or worse, she had run to them, tattled on him. The thought of his private life being exposed, of his authority being challenged, was intolerable. The new blizzard sealed him in with his fury. The cheap whiskey he'd been nursing for days became his constant companion. Each gulp fueled the inferno in his gut. He paced the small, grimy kitchen, his heavy boots thudding on the worn linoleum, his shadow, large and menacing, thrown against the wall by the flickering kerosene lamp. The power had been out for hours. "That damn girl," he growled to the empty room, the words slurring. "Always trouble. Just like her mother." His eyes fell on the spot where Maggie's music box had been smashed, and a fresh wave of violence surged through him. He thought of Maggie, locked away in the back room, her silence a constant infuriating accusation. He'd half a mind to go in there but no. His immediate problem was Lily, and those who had taken her. His paranoia festered. They were all in on it. The teacher, Nora Bell, with her prying eyes, that do-gooder pastor, the new doctor. They were trying to ruin him, to take away what was his. He imagined them whispering about him, judging him. The thought of being exposed, of losing control, was a terrifying prospect, one that his mind translated into a need for brutal, preemptive action. He had to get Lily back. He had to make an example. He had to silence them all. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in his soul. The wind shrieked like a banshee, the snow driving against the windows with relentless force. It was perfect cover. No one would be out. No one would see. No one would interfere. His plan began to form, crude and savage, fueled by alcohol and a lifetime of unchecked aggression. The church. That's where it started, with that meddling Reverend Holloway. He'd go there. He'd find out where they'd taken Lily. And if the girl herself was there, hiding. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He'd teach her a lesson she'd never forget. He'd teach them all. He rummaged through a pile of junk in the corner, pulling out a heavy length of rope and a thick, well-worn axe handle he sometimes used as a cudgel for stubborn logs or other, less inanimate obstacles. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, gleamed with a terrifying light. In Petersville County Hospital, Lily Rose, though physically safe, thrashed in her sleep. She whimpered, her small hands clutching at the blankets. "No, Travis. Please. Mommy." Dr. Breyer, making his late-night rounds, heard her soft cries and stepped into her room, his heart aching. He sat by her bed, speaking softly until her tossing subsided, unaware of the specific horrors brewing back in Havenwood, yet feeling an inexplicable chill, a premonition of gathering darkness. Reverend Grace, too, felt the oppressive weight of the storm and an equally oppressive sense of foreboding. The information from Marvin Lyle about Travis at the town dump preyed on her mind. The man was capable of anything. She'd tried calling Reverend Isaac earlier, but the phone lines were dead. She was cut off, isolated with her fears. She prayed for Lily's safety, for Michael's continued vigilance, and for the strength to face whatever was coming. The wind rattled the rectory windows like skeletal fingers, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was a harbinger, that Travis Gormley, empowered by the chaos and his own demons, was about to unleash his own terrible tempest upon them. She checked the locks on her doors, a gesture that felt pitifully inadequate against the malice she sensed was brewing in the heart of Havenwood. The very fabric of the night seemed to be tearing apart as the blizzard reached its zenith, each gust of wind a savage blow against Havenwood. Inside the rectory, Reverend Grace Holloway found little comfort. The dead phone lines had severed her connection to the outside world, to Dr. Briar and the fragile safety Lily had briefly known in Petersville. Mr. Lyle's horrifying story about Travis at the town dump echoed in her mind, painting a portrait of a man capable of unspeakable acts. Unbeknownst to Grace, her worst fears were materializing. Travis Gormley, his mind a cauldron of whiskey-fueled paranoia and murderous rage, had done the unthinkable. Through a venomous whisper from one of Mayor Whitman's less scrupulous contacts, a disgruntled orderly at Petersville County Hospital paid off for information, Travis had learned of Lily's exact location. In a feat of crazed determination, he'd driven his battered truck through the treacherous, near-impassable roads, arriving at the hospital in the dead of night when staffing was minimal due to the storm. He'd found Lily's room, a sleeping nurse nearby, and with brutal efficiency had snatched the terrified, half-asleep child, stifling her cries, and disappeared back into the blizzard before any alarm could be effectively raised. The drive back to Havenwood had been a nightmare. Lily shivering with terror in the passenger seat, Travis ranting, his eyes wild, the axe handle and rope beside him on the seat, a constant, unspoken threat. He hadn't taken her back to their house. His fury was too immense, his need for a more public, more symbolic act of vengeance too strong. He dragged Lily, her small cast making her stumble and cry out with each jarring step, through the deep snowdrifts towards the one place he now associated with all his problems, St. Michael's Church. Towards Reverend Grace Holloway. "You're gonna learn, girl," Travis snarled, his grip like iron on Lily's thin arm, yanking her forward when she faltered. "You and that meddling preacher, gonna teach you both a lesson." Lily, weak from her ordeal and now numb with a terror that surpassed anything she had ever known, could only sob, her pleas lost in the wind. The cold was a physical pain. Her fractured ankle screamed with every step, but it was nothing compared to the sheer horror of being back in Travis's clutches, his hot, liquor-stenched breath on her face. He hauled her into the churchyard, the old iron gates groaning in protest. The pale, snow-covered tombstones stood like silent, aghast witnesses. Here, under the whipping, skeletal branches of the ancient oak tree, Travis's rage exploded. He threw Lily to the ground, her small body thudding sickeningly against the frozen earth. "Think you can run from me?" he roared, kicking snow and ice into her face. "Think you can tell your lies?" He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Lily screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony that was nearly swallowed by the storm. He struck her then, a savage, open-handed blow that sent stars exploding behind her eyes and a coppery taste of blood into her mouth. He was beyond reason, a monster unleashed, his intent not just to punish, but to break her. Inside the rectory, Grace heard it, or perhaps felt it first, a vibration of pure evil that resonated through the stone walls, a sound, sharp and piercing, cutting through the wind's howl, a child's scream, Lily's scream. For a second, Grace froze, her blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. She's in Petersville. Safe. But the sound came again, followed by Travis Gormley's enraged roar. Denying her senses was no longer possible. Something monstrous was happening right outside her door. The carefully constructed calm she had cultivated for 30 years shattered. The memory of Daniel, of her past failure, did not paralyze her this time. It ignited a holy fire, a protective fury that burned away every last vestige of fear. She didn't pause to think, to weigh the risks. She only knew that a child was in mortal danger, and she was the only one there. She threw open the rectory door, heedless of the wind and snow that tore at her, and ran towards the churchyard, her old woolen robe flapping around her like inadequate wings. The scene that met her eyes would be seared into her memory forever. Travis Gormley, silhouetted against the driving snow, standing over Lily's small, crumpled form, his arm raised to strike again with the thick axe handle. "No!" Grace's voice, amplified by a strength she didn't know she possessed, cracked through the storm like a whip. "Travis Gormley, in God's name, stop!" Travis whirled around, his face a mask of demonic fury, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked enormous, terrifying, the axe handle held like a club. "Preacher," he spat. "You! This is your fault." Meddling old hag. He took a step towards her, raising the handle threateningly. "Get out of my way, or you'll get what she's getting." But Grace stood her ground, positioning herself directly between the enraged man and the terrified child. "You will not touch her again, Travis," she said, her voice trembling but unwavering. "Not while I draw breath. This is consecrated ground. You will not defile it further with your hate." For a moment, they were locked in a terrifying standoff. The brutal, drunken lumberjack and the aging, determined pastor. The wind howled around them, whipping snow into their faces. Lily, on the ground, let out a broken sob. That sound broke the spell. Grace saw not a monster, but a deeply broken, violent man. And she saw a child who needed her. "Give me the child, Travis," she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "This has to end. Now." Perhaps it was the unexpected steel in her voice, the unwavering conviction in her eyes, or perhaps some tiny buried flicker of shame or fear within Travis himself. He hesitated, his arm lowering slightly. In that instant of hesitation, Grace moved. Not towards him, but towards Lily. She knelt, shielding the child with her own body, her arms wrapping around Lily's trembling form. "It's all right, Lilybell," she whispered, using a pet name she hadn't realized she knew. "I'm here. You're safe now." Travis let out a frustrated, animalistic roar. He looked from Grace and Lily to the dark, imposing facade of the church, then back at the axe handle in his hand. He was outnumbered in a way, not by force, but by a moral authority he could not comprehend, but instinctively recoiled from. With a final venomous curse, he threw the axe handle down into the snow. "This ain't over, preacher," he snarled. "You'll pay for this, both of you." Then he turned and stumbled away, disappearing into the swirling vortex of the blizzard like a phantom. Grace didn't watch him go. All her attention was on Lily, who was clinging to her, shaking uncontrollably, her small face buried in Grace's robe. Grace held her tight, rocking her gently, murmuring prayers and words of comfort, shielding her from the storm's fury and the aftermath of Travis's demonic rage. The immediate danger had passed, but Grace knew, with chilling certainty, that Isaac Turner had been right. This was far from over. The fragile quiet that settled over the rectory after Travis Gormley's retreat was heavy with unspoken horrors. Reverend Grace Holloway held Lily close, the child's small body racked with tremors that had little to do with the cold. Grace managed to get her inside, away from the still raging blizzard, her heart a painful knot of fury and profound sorrow. Lily's new bruises were already beginning to bloom, stark and ugly against her pale skin. Her tiny casted ankle had taken fresh abuse. But it was the terror in Lily's eyes, a hollow, haunted look that no child should ever possess, that struck Grace to her core. He found me," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse, clinging to Grace as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. He said Mommy was bad. Like me." "Oh, my sweet Lily Bell," Grace murmured, rocking her gently, her own tears mingling with the child's. "Your mommy loved you more than anything, and you are not bad. You are brave, and you are good." She tended to Lily's injuries with hands that shook, cleaning the cuts, applying a cold compress to a swelling cheek, all the while speaking in low, soothing tones, trying to anchor the child to the present, to safety. When the storm finally broke the next morning, leaving Havenwood entombed in an eerie, sun-dazzled silence, the news of what had transpired at St. Michael's began to seep through the snowbound town. A few hardy souls, venturing out, had seen the disarray in the churchyard, the abandoned axe handle, the tracks leading to and from the rectory. Whispers turned into shocked exclamations. The sheer public brutality of Travis's alleged actions right on the church's doorstep shattered the community's carefully maintained veneer of placidity. Shame, heavy and cold, began to settle over Havenwood, a dawning awareness of a collective failure. As soon as the town's rudimentary phone lines were partially restored, Grace's first call was to Reverend Isaac Turner. Her voice, tight with exhaustion but firm with resolve, relayed the night's terrible events, including Lily's abduction from Petersville and the assault. Isaac, his earlier cynicism replaced by a grim fury, didn't waste a moment. He made a series of calls, his voice carrying the weight of old authority, bypassing Havenwood's compromised local network entirely. He reached a former protégé, now a captain in the state police, and a no-nonsense regional director at the State Child Protective Services, explicitly briefing Ms. Albright's supervisor on the Havenwood situation and the failure of local systems. Within hours, 2 state trooper cruisers, their tires chained for the treacherous roads, were dispatched from the district barracks, along with an unmarked car carrying 2 seasoned investigators from the state CPS. Their arrival in Havenwood, sirens off, but their official presence unmistakable, sent a ripple of unease through the town's established order, particularly in the mayor's office. While the state authorities began their work, starting with taking Grace's detailed statement and ensuring Lily's immediate medical reassessment, Dr. Breyer, alerted by Isaac, was already on his way back to Havenwood, his own fury a cold, hard knot. Reverend Ruth Whitlow, armed with Mr. Lyle's chilling account, made a discovery. Deep within a box of uncatalogued donations from when the old town hall annex was cleared out years ago, items that had somehow ended up in the church basement, she found a small, water-stained diary. Its cover was plain, but the first page bore a name in faded ink: Maggie Rose. With trembling hands, Ruth read. It was a heartbreaking record of Maggie's hopes turning to fear, of Travis's escalating control and abuse, and then a final, terrified entry, dated just before her disappearance. T found out I called the helpline, said he'd shut me up for good, said he'd take me where no one would ever find me. Told L, I'm going to the stars. God help my Lily. It was the missing piece, the voice from the grave they so desperately needed. The state investigators, armed with Marvin Lyle's testimony about the town dump and now Maggie's diary, converged on Travis Gormley's property. They found him bleary-eyed, belligerent, and still reeking of alcohol. As they questioned him, his denials grew louder, his story more inconsistent. Mayor Holt Whitman arrived, blustering about jurisdiction and outside interference. But the state police captain, a woman with eyes like flint, coolly informed him that this was now a state investigation into multiple felonies, including kidnapping, assault, and potentially murder. Whitman's face paled. It was during the methodical search of Gormley's dilapidated house and grounds that the true horror was unveiled. In a locked, boarded-up room at the back, a room Travis had claimed was merely for storage, they found her. Maggie Rose. She was emaciated, traumatized, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, but undeniably alive. Her rescue was a moment of stunned silence, then a flurry of controlled, urgent activity. Travis Gormley was arrested on the spot, his furious roars and threats ignored as he was handcuffed and placed in a state trooper vehicle. The sight of him being driven away, stripped of his bluster, was a profound moment of catharsis for those who witnessed it. The reunion between Maggie and Lily, carefully orchestrated by Grace Doctor, Breyer, and the CPS investigators in the quiet sanctuary of the rectory later that day, was almost unbearably poignant. Lily, held securely in Grace's arms, saw her mother enter, a thin, spectral figure who hesitated in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, a question filled with years of pain and longing. "Oh, my baby," Maggie choked out, her legs nearly buckling. "My Lily Bell." Grace gently encouraged Lily forward. The child slid from her lap and took a hesitant step, then another. Then she was running, stumbling on her cast, into her mother's outstretched arms. They clung to each other, mother and daughter, two survivors, their sobs a raw symphony of grief and immeasurable love. Maggie rocked Lily, whispering apologies and reassurances, stroking her hair, her touch a balm on wounds seen and unseen. Dr. Breyer discreetly wiped his eyes. Grace Holloway stood by, her heart overflowing, witnessing the first, fragile dawn of healing after a long, dark night. The truth, however terrible, was finally out, and the slow, arduous path to justice had begun. The trials of Travis Gormley and subsequently Mayor Holt Whitman became defining moments for Havenwood, stripping away the last vestiges of its carefully curated tranquility and exposing the rot that had festered beneath. Travis Gormley, confronted with Maggie's powerful, harrowing testimony, Lily's carefully presented child advocacy interview, Dr. Breyer's meticulous medical records, Marvin Lyle's damning eyewitness account of the riverside dumping, and Maggie's own tear-stained diary, was convicted on multiple counts, including kidnapping, aggravated assault, and the false imprisonment and systematic abuse of Maggie Rose. The judge, a stern woman from an outside county, handed down a sentence that ensured Travis would never again cast his shadow over another innocent life. He was led away in chains, a broken, pathetic figure, his reign of terror finally at an end. Mayor Holt Whitman's downfall was less dramatic, but equally significant for Havenwood. The state investigation, spurred by Reverend Isaac Turner's connections and the undeniable evidence of Whitman's interference, exposed a pattern of cronyism, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. He was forced to resign in disgrace before his own trial even began, which eventually saw him convicted and facing fines and a period of house arrest, his reputation irrevocably shattered. Havenwood, humbled and ashamed, began the arduous process of electing new leadership, individuals who spoke of transparency and accountability, not just image. For Lily and Maggie Rose, the months that followed were a delicate unfolding, a slow, painful journey from the darkness into a tentative light. Therapy, facilitated by funds quietly raised by Reverend Grace and a newly empathetic town council, became a cornerstone of their healing. Dr. Michael Breyer, often going beyond his role as a pediatrician, remained a steadfast presence, a trusted friend. Miss Nora Bell visited regularly, bringing books and art supplies, her gentle encouragement helping Lily rediscover the simple joys of learning and creativity, free from fear. Lily's laughter, when it first returned, was like the first bird song after a long winter. Hesitant, then brighter, more confident. She still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden loud noises, but the haunted look in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a child's natural curiosity and an astonishing resilience. Maggie, too, slowly shed the shackles of her trauma. With Grace's support, she found a small apartment on the other side of town, a sunny space she filled with plants and the tentative sounds of music. She began to speak of her experiences, not just in therapy, but to small supportive groups, her voice gaining strength with each telling, transforming her pain into a beacon for others. Reverend Grace Holloway, the woman who had once sought refuge in Havenwood's quietude, found herself unexpectedly at the heart of its transformation. The courage she had displayed that terrible night had unlocked something within her and within the community. Her sermons, once carefully academic, now resonated with a profound lived experience of faith, courage, and the fierce, active love required to combat darkness. St. Michael's Church, under her guidance and with the enthusiastic, if creaky, assistance of Mr. Marvin Lyle, became more than just a place of Sunday worship. Its doors opened wide, hosting support groups, community workshops, and a new after-school program for vulnerable children, spearheaded by a re-energized Nora Bell. The old bell in the tower, which Marvin Lyle now rang with a renewed sense of purpose, seemed to peal with a clearer, more hopeful tone. Reverend Ruth Whitlow continued her quiet, essential work, her wisdom a steady anchor, while Reverend Isaac Turner, watching from his cozy cottage, allowed himself a satisfied smile. The old guard had fallen, and something new, something better, was taking root. 2 years later, on a bright, crisp autumn afternoon, Havenwood held its annual Fall Festival on the town green. The air was filled with the scent of apple cider and pumpkin pie, the sounds of laughter, and the lively tunes of a local folk band. Lily Rose, now 10 years old, her cast long gone, her brown hair glossy and tied back with a bright blue ribbon, darted between games, her laughter echoing freely. She was still a thoughtful child, but the fear was gone, replaced by an open, engaging spirit. Maggie watched her, a serene smile on her face, chatting easily with Nora Bell and Dr. Michael Breyer, who was now a beloved fixture in town, his practice thriving. Reverend Grace Holloway stood near the ancient oak tree at the edge of the green, the same tree that had witnessed such horror on that blizzard-swept night. Now, its leaves were a blaze of gold and crimson, a testament to resilience and renewal. She watched Lily win a small prize at the ring toss, saw the pure, unadulterated joy on her face, and her heart swelled with a quiet, profound peace. Mr. Lyle was nearby, proudly showing off a new birdhouse he'd built with the children from the after-school program. Reverend Ruth was judging the pie contest with her customary gentle seriousness, and even Isaac had ventured out, holding court with some of the town's newer, more conscientious council members. The town hadn't forgotten its past. The scars remained, a reminder of the darkness it had allowed to fester. But Havenwood was no longer defined by its silence. It had found its voice, its courage, its conscience. The good people, those who had dared to speak out, to act, to care, had not only seen justice done, but had actively participated in the hard, necessary work of healing and rebuilding. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the green, Grace saw Lily run to Maggie, throwing her arms around her mother's waist in a fierce hug. It was a simple moment, one of countless such moments that now defined their lives. But for Grace, it was everything. It was the dawn after the storm, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the quiet, unshakable strength of the human spirit to choose light, even after the deepest darkness. The fight had been worth it. The story of Havenwood is a powerful reminder that silence enables suffering, and true change begins when ordinary people choose courage over comfort. Reverend Grace Holloway, Dr. Breyer, Reverend Isaac Turner, and others stood up not because it was easy, but because it was right. Their bravery broke the cycle of abuse, exposed corruption, and helped a broken town find its way back to compassion and justice. Lily and Maggie's journey from fear to freedom shows the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of love, advocacy, and community. In a world that often turns a blind eye, this story urges us to listen, to act, and to protect the most vulnerable, no matter the cost. It teaches us that healing takes time, but it is possible when people come together, speak out, and refuse to back down. Even in the darkest winter, hope can rise. Thank you all for following this story. May it serve as a reminder of the strength within us all, and wishing you health and peace in your own journeys.